What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 2 DFS and prop stream for the RSM Classic. Going to get you guys ready for all your exposure on Friday with a look at the weather report, strategy for Draftkings on tomorrow. We'll talk through ownership at the top end of the board, some shots gained metrics, which we're glad to have back this week. And then on the underdog and prize pick side, some stat averages for both golf courses, as well as how to attack the underdog and prize picks boards. And towards the end, we'll also mix in a little bit of a hard rock bet matchup that I've mixed in as well to go ahead and tie it all together. But hopefully everyone's having a fantastic Thursday so far. Luckily, we're able to get this live stream in before Thursday night football starts. We'll have those to sweat out, a lot of lineups on that side, a few props that we've entered over there as well, and ready to add on top of it for golf as well. So any questions, if you guys are catching this live, feel free to throw those in the chat. Already, if you're watching this on replay as well, you guys can also try and pick my brain there, but smash the like button if you guys haven't already. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So the first thing to note, especially from the Showdown side of things, is the split between the two golf courses, which today the Plantation course was by far the easier of the two. The Seaside course played about minus 2.22, much easier than what we had for last year, where it played closer to even par. But the Plantation course also played easier than what we had for last year. So it played to a minus 3.5 average, which at least based on my memory of this event, is the easiest that we've ever seen. So the golf course, the pin locations were set up to attack, and based on the little bit of the broadcast that we had from today, some of the pin locations were in bowls. So with a 1.3 shot difference from side to side, it's a little bit under 1.3 shots overall. That's the side that we want to attack in our lineups. And the unfortunate side effect of that is that all of the ownership's really going to condense on some of those Plantation players as well. But with over a 1.2 shot difference from side to side, it's well warranted. So I'm going to be playing only guys on that golf course, even though we're going to be dealing with some ownership problems when it comes to lineup construction. They've got a few creative ways to get around that, including leaving salary on the table, getting differentiation with your 6 and 7K range players, which we're going to expand on a little bit later on. But the wind forecast looks almost the exact same from day to day, which is why I feel so confident in going with only Plantation guys. If we had some more wind in this Friday forecast, then it might make sense to get some Seaside guys in there, but I don't think that's going to be the case. And that is the more exposed golf course as well. So I think the Plantation, even if you had a whole lot of wind, is probably the side that you want to be on. But it's important to note for the prop side later on that conditions are going to be extremely calm, the same kind of temperatures that we had. The only difference from Thursday to Friday, at least per this HRRR forecast, is that we've got some overcast coming through, which could cause the golf course to play a tad bit longer than what it was for today. Also, when there's overcast, the air tends to be heavier. It's more humid when you have that coming through, which will make the ball not travel as far. You have more humid conditions, slightly stronger winds when that's the case as well. But maybe like a 0.2 shot difference for each of these golf courses would be at most the kind of change that we're expecting. But because of this weather edge, which is great to have for our Showdown lineups, ownership's going to look a little bit wacky for round number 2, because you're not going to be the only one that sees that 1.3 shot difference between the two sides. And especially with some of your spend up players, almost all of the top 5 in the ownership are Plantation course players. In fact, the whole way down to Vince Whaley in the top 10 of the ownership are players on the right side of the draw. So Harris English at -3, a Siwoo Kim at -5. He's one of the better players that played on the Seaside course today. JT Poston, Brian Harmon, a lot of our outright bets that are in a good position, Daniel Berger included at that -4 spot, are the ones that are getting that sort of attention. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you should probably be having at least 3, maybe even 4 of those players out there in your lineups. It's just that you're not going to be getting any differentiation with those sort of options. You're going to have to do so with your other 3 to 4 spots that you have in your lineup. And the reason why some of these guys are going to be extremely chalky is with that extra 1.2 to 1.3 shot difference. That's a 5 to a 7 point difference with your fantasy score. And as long as the website that you guys are getting your projections from is doing it properly, when you're optimizing, when you're running lineups with a 5 to a 7 point bias, it's almost impossible to get any of the guys that are on the other side of the draw. So on my website, you guys don't have to worry about that. All of that is accounted for in the projections. If you're running on an optimizer, it's going to be spitting out almost all Plantation players to begin with. But on top of that, you probably want to deselect the guys that you have on the Seaside course on top of that. And the only Seaside guys that we see in the top 10 of the ownership would be a Rico Hoey, who shot -10, and then a Michael Thorbjornsen, who's also at the top end of the pricing, who shot a -8. And normally these guys that shot like 10 under par, -9, like a Novak, we'd see up here towards the top. But it's a bit of a different slate with the kind of a wave edge that we have going on. It's overcoming that top end of the leaderboard stuff. So you can still play some guys on the plantation course that shot pretty good scores today that aren't getting all the kind of ownership. So like an Andrew Novak, for example, he's down here at number 10 in the ownership, only about 15% owned, despite being at -9, the best score of anyone on the Seaside course today. Pretty good for somebody that has a ticket on him at 82.5 to 1. So we're feeling pretty solid about that. Overall, can't complain about round one overall. We have a few guys in contention to win the thing in the top 20. Also, a lot of them get to play the easier golf course tomorrow. So I'm pretty stoked about that. Also, we are able to profit for our props today. Ended up having a full cash, also a cash with one hit and one push to get us to 4 units. So that was pretty sweet. And then for DFS as well, with so many of our guys, core plays, value plays at the top end of the board, not quite winning all the money yet, but in good position after round number 1. So we'll see if we can continue that over the next couple days. But that's the ownership at the top end of the board right there. And it still matters. You down with some of your 6, 7K range players, you're going to see a lot of extra emphasis on the plantation guys, but especially the ones that shot like -3 or 4 of the Seaside today. You've got off my mind, maybe 3 or 4 guys in the 7K range that are 9 to 12% owned. One of them is even like 13 to 14% owned in the 7K range for tomorrow because they're on the proper course. They have some good shots gained metrics, and they played well for the very first day. So obviously a lot of people, there's multiple reasons why people would want to be getting there. Those are some of the ticking time bombs that you have to be careful about, because with a lot of the good chalk towards the top here, the studs that are playing on the proper side of the draw, if you pair two, maybe even 3 of those players with 1 or 2 of those really chalky 7K range players, then you've got 5 guys in a lineup that are 15 to 25% owned, and you've got no spot for leverage. Maybe you're one last player. You can find somebody that's sub 5%, but you just have to be careful when you're using these kind of studs. Maybe you want to go with more of the studs and duds approach so that you can have 2 6K range guys where you can find some sub 5%ers, or go with a more balanced lineup construction and leave some salary on the table. Because if you do take 3 or 4 of these chalky guys together and you only have 2 spots to get different, even that doesn't guarantee you a unique lineup. If you put in two of those sub 5%ers, that combined with leaving $500 to $1,000 on the table, though, is where you start to get that kind of differentiation. So consider some of those more creative lineup constructions, leaving that salary on the table, as a lot of people are going to be building the same way as you if you're playing that wave edge. Other thing I want to note before we talk through the shots gained metrics is how I'm building my player pool for tomorrow. We have a few of the categories from the last couple weeks. That would namely be course history, which we've been looking at for a lot of the events without shot link data. Also high upside players, trying to find players of the more aggressive players that make the most birdies on the PGA Tour. Regardless of what golf course you're at, being aggressive, being a high birdie percentage player correlates to a higher Draftkings score. So those were, the kind of things that we were really leaning on when we didn't have the laser data. But now that we know how people are playing, this is going to be something that we lean on heavily for this golf tournament. And although we don't have every single player shot link data from round number 1, we have the players that matter because we're only playing guys on plantation with that 1.3 shot difference. And the Seaside course, where all of those players were today, is the course where you have the shot link data from it. So for round 3 Showdown, it is going to get a bit wonkier, as half of the field or half the guys that make the cut, we're not going to have the shot link data from the day before, but we can use the 1 round of data from before. So for example, when we get to round number 3 and we're going through ball striking poppers and short game regression candidates, if somebody played the Seaside course round 1 but didn't play it in round number 2, we can still use some of that round 1 data for the round 3 stuff. So that's how we'll be handling that. But the thing I want you guys to take away from this is not just the reasons that I'm using to get onto players, but it's the process involved with it. You should have a rhyme and reason for getting to the players that you are, whether it's course history or high upside players like we've already mentioned, or some of the shots gained metrics that we're about to go through. So you can see at the top, we've got ball striking poppers. That would be guys that have been really good off the tee and on approach. I'm trying to prioritize those guys in a lot of my lineups, and also short game regression candidates. Those are players that were solid off the tee and on approach, maybe not standouts in either of those 2 categories. They could be about a neutral, maybe slightly better than neutral between those 2 categories, but around the green and putting left a lot to be desired. If you were somebody that was a neutral off the tee and on approach that lost like 4 strokes between those 2 categories, the around the green and the putting, I'll give those players a bit of a leash. I'll give them a chance for a bounce back the next day, because those short game categories around the green and putting are the most volatile that we have in golf. Whereas the ball striking stats, the off the tee and approach, which were solid on those short game regression candidates, are the most consistent categories that we have in golf. So that's why I'm looking to get some of those guys into my lineups. That's why I'm looking at the RSM Classic results and trying to target those players as well, so that I'm very intentional about everyone that I'm using. And this is especially the case in a 156 player field. It's maybe slightly different if there's only 30 players in the field. Maybe you don't have, enough players to choose from to be as selective as what we are here. But with 156 players to choose from, even with very specific categories like we have here, I've got like 35 to 40 guys in my player pool for tomorrow. So relatively large pool, didn't have any issues rounding it out, even though we're very specific about it. And it helps you weed out some of the nasty plays, the ones that you were just getting to for the hell of it that you probably don't need in there. And I hate when I hear people say that, oh, I'm just playing them for leverage, because with 156 players, there are plenty of ownership leverage spots. There are plenty of leverage opportunities to be had. Be intentional about which ones you're picking, right? Don't just pick them out of a hat, because if you're doing that, you're going to have a really hard time getting that optimal lineup. Next on, let's go to the shots gained metrics and what we saw from some of the players today. And it's beautiful to have these back, because as you guys know, I'm a data nerd. This is probably the biggest part of my process for Showdown, and not having it the last few weeks kind of stunk. So if there's any players you guys want me to deep dive, feel free to let me know. But we're going to go through some ball striking poppers, some of the short game regression candidates there too. And then we're going to go to the prop and betting side just shortly afterwards. What's going on, Jose? He says the MF Oracle strikes again, hit the under on Wallace and Smalley. Absolutely. It was a pretty solid day, plus 1.05 units into the bankroll. And he said, bro, you were in first place for like 1 second. Man, that's the story of my life in DFS. If they ended DFS contests for main slate after the very first round, I would have probably an extra 5 takedowns in my career. So I start off hot too. Hopefully you can sustain that. I've done that a few times. I've gone wire to wire multiple times to win GPPs. So it can be done, my man. Best of luck, and let's get you some run good over these next few days. Well, we're going to start with the ball striking poppers, as I mentioned. So at the top here, we've got a Trevor Cone who gained the most strokes between his off the tee and on approach play. And almost all these guys in the top 5, top 10, if they're low owned, you're going to see them in my player pool. So, Trevor Cone is going to be a sub 5%er. You'll see him in a few of my large field GPP lineups. At Pan Kadzire, I've got him at like 2.5% ownership. You'll see him sprinkling into like 5 to maybe 7 to 8% of my large field GPP exposure. Jesper Svensson, he gained off the tee and on approach and lost 2 strokes with the putter. So not only a ball striking popper, but perhaps a short game regression candidate, as it's hard to believe that he's going to lose 2.5 strokes putting every single day. And Andrew Novak also hit the ball well, as you would expect for somebody that shot -9 and gained about 7 strokes to the field. Doug Gim did the same thing as well at -10. Some of these players that were more putting heavy, like a Novak, a Doug Gim, you can't count on them gaining 3 to 4 strokes putting every single day, right? Just like we give Jesper a little bit of slack based on what he did for today, we also kind of have to hold it against these couple of players because of how they played. But both of them were also top 5 ball strikers that we had for the very first day. So, even if you ignore the short game contributions from these 2 players, they're still some of the best players that we have hitting into round number 2. So a Novak, for example, you see in my player pool. A Doug Gim, I'm a little bit more sketched out by with that putting. And Alex Smalley also hit the ball beautifully. He gained over 3 strokes on approach today. Grayson Sig gained over 2 strokes in that category as well. Brian Harmon, and you can see the rest of the top 10, the top 15 on the screen there. All these players you should be giving a boost to, and all of them, because we have the shots game metrics only from the Seaside course, it helps you pick out some of your favorite plantation players. So that's personally what I did for a very solid portion of my player pool. I would say that out of the 4 categories that I'm using for tomorrow, that the ball striking category is by far the one that I have the most players for. So if you really want to focus on this top 15 to top 20, I really couldn't blame you. But also, let's take a look at the short game category. So the short game categories are more volatile. These guys that gained 4 to 5 strokes putting, it is very hard to believe that they're going to do that in back-to-back rounds. And you can say the same thing about the around the green. These guys that gained 1 to 1.5 strokes over there cannot be counted on to do that in every single day. So especially these putters, that's where the gains are a little bit more drastic. If they weren't as solid with the ball striking stats, they're likely going to be fades in my exposure. And there are going to be some exclusions. There's going to be some exceptions to that rule based on them fitting maybe the course history tab or being one of the higher upside players that we have in the field. But the short game, them gaining the 2.5 to 5 strokes putting, should not be the reason that you're using them. But on the flip side, if we take a look at the guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes in these 2 categories, that'd be the around the green and the putting, and they were okay with the ball striking stats, those are perfect bounce back candidates, because these 2 stats are a lot more consistent over an entire event. So if they can continue that the next day and then just be a neutral in these two categories, you could see into 3 to even 5 shot swings from player to player. So let's start with Brandon Valdez. He's that extremely talented young collegiate player that is now finally making his start out here on tour. I expect him to be somebody at the end of the year that is potentially even getting into the FedEx Cup playoffs. So the fact that he gained ball striking and lost 3 strokes putting has me loving him as a bounce back candidate. And nobody really knows this guy yet, as well as somebody like myself does. Being relatively close to Luke Clanton, he's extremely close, best friends with Brendan Valdez. That's how I'm a little bit more familiar with his game. And from everything I've heard from Luke, some of the other people that have sung his praises before, he might even be better than some of these guys like a Luke Clanton. So at T104, he'll be about probably sub 2% owned in large GPPs. He's one of those bounce back short game candidates that you can look to. And Dylan Wu's the same way. He gained 1.5 strokes off the tee, just lost a little bit with his approach play, but he lost 3.5 strokes between the short game categories. It's hard to think that that's going to happen every single day. And Tyler Duncan didn't do great ball striking. He actually lost ever so slightly to the field between the off the tee and on approach, but he did gain on approach a little bit over a stroke in that category and lost 3 strokes putting. If he's a neutral there, that's him shooting -3 the very next day. And in fact, because he's on plantation, that could be him shooting like -5 because of the difference in course difficulty. They've got a Chesson Hadley. He's also a bounce back candidate that hit the ball well, but lost strokes putting. A Jesper we mentioned before, but even a Mason Howell here. And not to give away all my value plays for tomorrow, all my diamonds in the rough like a Brendan Valdez, but Mason Howell you may have seen at the U.S. Amateur, extremely good player, also played at the Walker Cup and was a standout player there as well. Shot 58 when he was 12 years old. This is the kind of kid that also, maybe in a year or two, he may take a little bit longer to get out here. He's younger than a Brendan Valdez is, that I'm expecting really big things from. So even though he shot +3, he lost almost 5 strokes in the short game categories. Like, if you're going to give a bounce back to a high upside player like Mason, do it when it's that kind of shots gained profile, not the opposite where they were absolutely horrendous with their ball striking. But you can extend that to guys like this Kyle Cottom. I don't know anything about him at all. He's somebody that this is really the first time that I've seen him before, but he was okay ball striking and lost about 2 strokes with the putter. Those are guys that you might want to look to in your round 2 exposure. They're all going to be low owns, right? None of these guys are towards the top end of the leaderboard. So if you're looking to get some leverage within that plantation wave and maybe to offset 3 or 4 of those chalkier players that you're using at the top end of the board, you play one of these short game regression candidates, you'll leave $500 to $1,000 on the table. You're not going to have to worry about duplication and the large field GPPs. And I would say you only have to leave that $500 to $1,000 on the table if you're in the large field GPPs. If you're in a contest that's single entry or something that's a smaller field GPP, then you don't have to go quite that far. But there's a lot of utility in getting to these sort of players. And to remember back to some of the player pull tags that I'm using for tomorrow, they've got the high upside and also the course history players. Those are not dependent on how they played for today. So if you're looking for some of the lower owned players on the plantation side, then you might want to use the course history and the high upside tags, as you can find those lower owned players that still check those boxes. So that's why I have different categories that not only include the shots gained metrics, but also much more general stats, so that I can get a good blend of short-term guys and also long-term guys that fit this sort of slate to give me a more well-rounded set of exposure. And of course, if you guys have any ideas for player pull tags that you want to use for yourself, you guys can add on top or subtract from what I use to make it best suited for what you guys want to play. But it's Bermuda grass this week. So if you guys want to use Bermuda grass putting stats, that's something that you could look at. You could look at comp course history, right? You could say, like, instead of course history tab, like you could use a Port Royal. That's one of my top comp courses for this week. You could find some of the best Port Royal players and use them in your player pool. Get as creative or, as little as, not as creative as you want to with your process. Just do what works the best for you. Just have a process for building your player pool and get those nasty, for no reason plays out of there. If you do that, you're going to have a much better long-term ROI when you get some of the plays that are just completely tanking your lineups out of there. And I'd highly recommend adding that to your process. On the prop side of things, we've got the averages for both sides over here. We got the Seaside course at the top, plantation at the bottom. Seaside course played -2.22 today. So it was the quote unquote harder of the two, but still played way easier than last year, which was the reason why we were able to profit on our exposure today. Birdie average was 4.24 per round. Bogey average went down to 1.8 per round. I would expect those to be extremely consistent for tomorrow. Maybe they move like 0.05 to 0.1 in either direction, but Anything more than that would surprise me. A fairway average will probably stay rated about 9.25 per round again. And same thing with the green average. It was 14.23 per round. So right about 14.25 is what you guys can expect for round number 2. And next up, we got the plantation averages. So that was the course that's a par 72. Worth noting, the Seaside's a par 70. So that's why I have these averages in parentheses. So I can kind of remind you of the par of the golf course. But the plantation course with the extra par 5 had a birdie average of 5.11 per round and also a bogey average of only 1.58. And because we don't have shot link data over there, we're not going to have the fairway and green averages to work with on the Seaside. But we're also not going to have those posted on the prop board. So we'll have to see if we get fairways, maybe greens for the Seaside guys on Prize Picks, but not a whole lot of selection as of right now. In fact, I was going through the board a little bit before I got on live stream here, and I didn't see very much that I liked. And it's because I think the board is priced a little bit too positively. You've got guys like Davis Riley, who's an average to maybe even below average player in this field. That's at 68 strokes at the plantation course. To go back to the average was 68.5. So an average to below average player being at 68 strokes is too optimistic. And here's the problem with that is that it's not just O'Reilly, right? We could say that about almost everyone on the board. I think almost everyone's 0.5 to even a stroke too low, regardless of the golf course, not just the plantation guys, but the Seaside guys that I was going through before. They only posted them about 10 minutes before we got on the live stream. So I didn't do my full due diligence, but for what I saw before we got on here, but like, for example, a Zach Johnson at 67.5 strokes, the average was 67.8 strokes. Just like a Davis Riley, Zach Johnson's an average to maybe a slightly below average player. That means that he would be closer to a 68 projection. Once again, about 0.5 off of where he probably should be. So if I think these guys are in too positive of a spot, you can say the same thing about the birdie averages, by the way. It's probably about 0.5 off on almost all these players, is we want to take a whole lot of fade value. But here's what happens when you take fade value on these boards. They give you fuck all for a payout. They give you a plus 150 payout for a 2-leg parlay. It's highway robbery unless there's just massive value on these boards. And if they're going to price the entire board too optimistically, it makes it unplayable. So at this point, guys, I don't plan on playing very much for round number 2. If they're going to strong arm us like this, if they're going to give us 2.5x payouts on double fade slips and give us dog shit lines like this, then I'm just not going to give them action. So I'm going to go through it afterwards. I'm going to see if there's any potential value that we can kind of squeeze out. The one thing I'll point out is maybe like Zach Johnson over on birdies. They had him at 4 birdies on here. Did they rip that off the board? Or here he is right here with the 4 birdie mark. Like maybe you can consider taking that because the average was 4.24 per round, but he's a below average birdie maker. So we probably have him at like, I don't know, 4.05 to maybe 4.1 birdies are better per round. There's not a ton of value on that sort of spot either. So I'm personally probably going to stay away from entering a whole bunch. Maybe there's like one slip that I end up entering, at least for the sake of this live stream here, guys. There's not going to be anything that we're going to tail here together. I will say, though, on my X/Twitter, that's Gsluke DFS, there's a link in the description for you guys to check that out as well. If I end up entering anything, I will give you guys a community tail over there. So make sure you follow me on X/Twitter if you guys haven't already, not only for that slip for round number 2, if we end up entering anything, but also for all the extra stuff that I post there too. I've got weather updates, pin location updates that I'm posting there all the time. Also live conditions updates whenever I'm able to make it to these sort of events. So a great resource to have if you guys are on X/Twitter. So that's where you'll find the community tail if there's even one to get to, guys. And that's the thing that I've learned over the years. You know, I've done this for almost 5 years professionally at this point, breaking down these underdog and prize pick sports, is knowing when not to enter props. When the only props and the only slips that make sense to enter are just massively negative EV because of the kind of payout shifts that they're offering, sometimes the best thing to do is just not to enter anything at all. And, you know, maybe you guys have some NFL props tonight that you guys really like. Like I have some NFL exposure that I can mix in with it to get to some 3x payouts. It'd be fades though, but like, let's use this Max McGreevy as a little bit of an example. I know he went nuclear low at the plantation course today, which screwed us on a head-to-head with Collie. That kind of stunk, and it stunk to see him, especially of all people, go out and shoot that sort of number. But 67 strokes, that's a -3 at the Sea Island course. That's just the push. He's got to shoot -4 to go under. He's got to gain 2 strokes to the field to do so. I mean, it's not just McGreevy. I guess I'm using him as the case example here because, you know, he screwed me today, and I'm kind of mad at him, and we'll use him as the guinea pig because of that. but there's no way in hell he should be at 67.5 strokes. 67.5 is where he should be. He shouldn't be down at 67. You can say that of a lot of these players that you have on here. Like same thing with Valimaki. He should not be down there at 67 strokes. Now, is there anything to really pair up with it to make it worth entering some of these fades? There's not, because this fade value is only like 0.5 to maybe 1 stroke fade value. If it was like these guys were at 67 strokes and they should be at 69 strokes, then maybe I would eat that 1.5 or that plus 150 payout, the 2.5x that you're getting on these sort of players, but it's just not worth it in this sort of scenario. So that's my current take on the prize picks board. Underdog didn't have anything up there before. We'll have to see if they get anything posted later tonight. But I will throw this out on the Hard Rock Bet side. I do have a matchup that I've entered for round 1, and it's going to be this Chris Kirk head-to-head against Brandt Snedeker. So this is the market without a tie, which you can get to if you go here to the head-to-head tab, and you click on any of these matchups, and then you go here to the tie no bet. That's where you can find that. By the way, Bud Colley versus McGreevy, I am highly considering going back to the plus 105. I haven't done it quite yet, though, so that's why we're using this Chris Kirk one. Let's talk about Kirk versus Snedeker. They've got Kirk, who's got a win at this golf course, 2 top 5 finishes at this golf course in the past, and also has 3 top 14 finishes in a row over his last 3 starts on tour, versus Snedeker, who's missed 6 of his last 10 cuts and doesn't even have tour status anymore. Kirk has won over the last couple years. Snedeker is an old, crusty veteran. So although Kirk is the favorite here, he is minus 145 odds, I have this priced closer to minus 185 to minus 190 myself. I think it was minus 188 that I had in my model. So with minus 188 value at minus 145, I'll mix that in all day. And especially with Kirk's form and the kind of course history that he has at the Seaside course. And my model, by the way, does not incorporate those. It does not incorporate course history or form. Actually, it's only form that it looks at with my model. So it doesn't incorporate the course history, I guess. On top of that, on top of just the form being clearly better for Chris Kirk, you've got some course history stuff that also helps it out as well. So minus 145, I think is a steal. This won't be available on every single sports book, only the ones that have the 3-ball matchups. But if you want to find this on a site like Draftkings, go to the matchups tab and then click on the 3-ball matchups instead of just the 3 balls tab. And you can find some of these head-to-heads. And I'm assuming the odds might be a little bit worse than what we have here, because if my model has it at closer to minus 185, minus 190, I'm assuming DraftKings Fanduel are probably closer to that number than what you're going to see here with minus 145. Hard Rock tends to post their own odds for these head-to-heads. They have their own model and they trust it, which is pretty great from the bettor standpoint, because they don't just rip off DraftKings and FanDuel. They stick to their guns. They'll post lines that are pretty drastically off than what we get over there. So if you do your line shopping, you can always find some value on Hard Rock Bet. That's a part of my process for finding the value for like round 2 and 3 bets like what we have here. But also the traditional analysis helps us get on the spots like this with the Chris Kirk. So for the rest of the exposure I'm entering, guys, on Hard Rock Bet, maybe we add this Bud Colley head-to-head for plus 105. You guys can find that on my Patreon page. Golf prop tiers, how you get access to all of this. The spreadsheets before with all of the DFS stuff, all my projections, my entire player pool for tomorrow can be found via the Golf DFS tier. Link down below to find access to both of those. And it's only $15 a month for the kind of content that I post there. And it's way cheaper than all the other websites that you guys see around the industry. And unlike the other sites that'll just half-ass it this time of year, post projections, don't even do content, right? They just assume that you're going to do it all by yourself this time of year. We have content not only for main slate, golf course breakdowns every single week, also Showdown for rounds 2 through 4, and everything broken down for props for rounds 2 through 4 as well. You won't find that kind of detail anywhere else around the industry, and also at a better price point than what I have on my Patreon. So I know it's towards the end of the year. I know it's the last full-scale event that we have, but figured I'd throw it out there for anyone considering joining for 2026. It's the place to be. And in 2026, we're going to be doing the same exact stuff that we've been doing here in 2025. So we'd be glad to have you on board. And obviously, we're doing NFL stuff over there too. So my Patreon page has some of that stuff posted for tonight. So if you guys need DFS projections for entering for tonight's game, you guys can also find that on my Patreon page, and some of the prop stuff that we've entered over there as well. But let me see if there's any last second questions. If not, best of luck with all the exposure that you're getting to, guys. I hope to see you guys at the top end of the GPPs. It's cash out and any prop slips, any matchup bets that we're going with as well. Keep an eye out for my X/Twitter for a potential community tail. But come on, Prize Picks, right? Give us a board that's a lot more competitive. They know what they're doing, by the way, giving us boards like this. They know that they're trying to tax people looking at the minus 10 at the top of the leaderboard that think that everyone's going to go batshit low, and they're trying to take advantage of that. not around here, right? We're not just going to be degenerates and just enter bets for the sake of it. We're going to do it in an informed fashion, and that's what you get here with this community and also with all the content that I have there on Patreon. But like I said, best of luck, and let's have ourselves a round number 2.